The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode 107.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Next Generation episode, The Offspring. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Let's get this over with.
Oh, an auspicious beginning. And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory. How you feeling?
Oh, doing wonderful. You know, it's going to be a good episode when the director actually puts a scene in with himself just so that he can, spice it up a little bit and be in it.
Gets his James T. Kirk moment.
Yeah.
So before we get into all that, folks, please be sure to share the podcast with your friends to help us grow our community and our audience. That helps us immensely. You're the primary way that we grow our audience, so we do appreciate that. So this is The Offspring. It is a third season episode of The Next Generation.
And that means the season where it gets tolerable.
Yes. And I'll get into why I picked this, but let me get into why we picked this. Because it connects with Picard, the Star Trek series Picard, it just ended, and we may have mild spoilers for that if you haven't watched it yet. So if you really want to stay away from spoilers from the Picard series, you're intending to watch it at some point soon, stay away from come back and not stay away. Come back and listen to this when you're ready to have a little bit of spoilers. But we're gonna, because this connects with that season.
What's sad about this episode is, as you can tell by our intros, we really don't like this episode. This is not a good episode. But what's sad is it's the episode right after what I still consider to be one of my absolute favorite TNG episodes, Yesterday's Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That was a good one. That totally redeemed Tasha Yar.
Yeah, and it's just like, it went from Yesterday's Enterprise, which was such a high point, to this.
Yeah. It's interesting that you guys you talk about that, because a lot of people consider this one of the best. And in fact, it was put up for some science fiction awards. I don't know if it was a Hugo or something like that, but it was up there. And it's interesting that you guys don't like it. We should mention also Jonathan Frakes' his directorial debut, and he was the first cast member to direct.
Right. Well, so he's and they actually did a good choice with that for him. I mean, I've read the stories about how, when he approached the showrunners and said, I want to direct, they said, okay, fine, but you're going to go to director school first. And they made him follow around their existing directors and learn their production process inside out. And that then opened the door to other people like LeVar Burton and Gates McFadden and in other series, Roxanne Dawson and people like that becoming directors. And they really were, the showrunners really were kind of careful about who they let direct. They did not let just anybody direct. Some cast members who were known for not showing up and being entirely professional and learning their lines, Harry Kim, wanted to direct, but were not given the opportunity. So it wasn't just because you're an actor on our show, you get direct.
Yes, that's true.
But they did something kind of intelligent here, where by having Riker be almost not in this episode, it lets Jonathan Frakes focus on his directorial work his first time out.
Right. Well, the other thing about first timers is this is the first Star Trek episode written by Rene Echevarria, who this was a spec script. He was the trope of the waiter who sends in a script, who's trying waiting tables while trying to make his break. He sent in this script. They liked it. They ended up hiring him onto the staff. And he's now a big-time producer. He created a big show for Amazon recently called Carnival Row, starring Orlando Bloom.
He was also involved with the 4400 and others, which is because I generally like a lot of the stuff that he writes. A lot of the stuff that I've seen that he's been involved in is really, really good. It's just this particular episode kind of strikes a little odd, but
in fairness to it, it's not the worst episode they've ever produced. It's just not great. I mean, it has some nice things in it. It's some things that are genuinely funny, some things that are genuinely moving. It's just those are individual moments in an episode that doesn't really hang together upon rewatch. My memory of this when I saw it in the 80s was I liked it. But that was judging it based on 80s style television that it was surrounded by.
Right.
Watching it now with modern standards, it doesn't age well.
Yeah, that's fair to say. So one thing to note, this one is not so much about Data's child, which is who the titular offspring is, but it's about Data being a parent and how he deals with that. I mean, that's really I think that seems to be the nugget of the story, how they get started with this story. Although originally, I gather, this was really about the child when it was submitted, and the producers came back to Renee Echevarria to say, we want this to be about our characters, our cast, not primarily about this other character. So make it more about our characters.
Yeah, although to me, this story is really the measure of a man, the next generation. I mean, it's all in the measure of a man. It's like, okay, does Data have rights or is he a toaster? Now, we all know Data's a toaster, but they've decided he's a toaster that has rights. So now, what if the toaster has a baby toaster? Does the baby toaster have rights? Yeah. And it's basically and what rights does the toaster have over the toaster baby? And so it's basically Measure of a Man Part 2. And so instead of Bruce Maddox in this episode, we have Admiral older Bruce Maddox, who is also a cybernetics genius and stuff.
Yes. So Melinda Snodgrass, who wrote Measure of a Man, actually felt like this was a retread. She didn't like this episode. She felt it was, how did she say? I felt it was fairly obvious and tired and stupid, and I didn't want to do it.
Ooh, denial.
So tell us how you really feel about it.
And the sad part is, I like the idea of this being a continuation of that, Measure of a Man, of that same idea. Just, how it was played out maybe didn't work out quite as well as they'd hoped.
Yeah, well, she felt it was a retread of, going back over the same ground that Measure of a Man did. It was a good show for Jonathan Frakes to start with, and she said it was a nice bottle show, and he didn't have to cope with alien cultures. And that's the thing is, it's a bottle show, and everything takes place in the Enterprise, and it's just internal.
Yeah, I'm not that wild about Measure of a Man either, so.
Yes, for obvious reasons. But the difference with Measure of a Man was it was about Data's rights, as you said, in individual, and this was about rights as a parent, and that's the key here is, as you said, is Data a living being, and if so, if he is or is not, is he a parent? And, well, this is where we go with it. So we have Lal. We start with Lal. That, by the way, which means beloved in Hindi.
Yeah, but it's a male term of affection.
Right. Well, because we start with a non-gender specific android.
Hey, we're still giving it a gendered name for obliviousness reasons.
Well, you get, I guess all names, well, they're not. You could call it Robin. Which
Chris. It's Pat.
Chris.
Yeah.
Pat. So to start with, Data has summoned Troy and Geordi and Wesley to a lab where he's been holed up since coming back from a cybernetics conference, and he's been very secretive, and we know this because Wesley has been trying to break in and find out what's going on. I have to say, in this episode especially, Will Wheaton is not doing great acting here. I mean, some of his stuff is really kind of not good.
Marina Sirtis is not doing great acting either, but then they're being fed lines that are pretty lame.
Yes. So he introduces them to this android called Lal, who has no discernible features to indicate sex and has rudimentary features for reasons.
And they really prominently let us know that the android does not have any features to indicate sex.
Yes, it's unclothed.
We get a really good look at its non-gendered nature.
its Barbiness. So it also calls Data father, and the others don't seem thrilled that Data is calling it his child. Data tells us that he's transferred his neural pathways into Lal, which is similar to what isn't that a little similar to what we eventually get in Picard series?
Yeah, with fractal neuronic cloning of you can reconstruct all of Data's knowledge from a single neuron equivalent, and it's like, we keep getting these android Katras with no payoff.
Yeah.
I mean,
this at least sounds like this sounds more like a file system copy though than it does like a cloning of the device.
Which introduces the problem of why isn't it just Data in a new body?
Right.
Like why does it suddenly have different personality and all this stuff? So that
I interpreted it more as like he's copying his firmware over, but not the data files.
Yeah,
the OS.
Flashing the firmware. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, flash firmware, install the OS, but it's his own user in there. Okay. So Picard is not happy. He tells Data that he should have been consulted. And actually, this was kind of a good line because Data says, well, no other crew members are required to consult the captain about procreation.
And I like the way Data says it. I have not noticed other crew members consulting you about their procreation. It's like, yeah, duh. And this goes to one of my key problems with this episode and a lot of other episodes of this era, because what they're trying to do are now this one's kind of a blend of high concept and character driven. So in writing, a high concept is where it's really about the concept rather than the characters, and character driven is obvious by comparison. And this is kind of both, because it's like, what if Data, there's our character driven aspect, had an android child? There's our high concept.
Right.
And a lot of these early episodes are high concept because they haven't really fleshed out the characters as well to where the characters can drive the story as much. And in these early seasons, we don't really have a feel for what the 24th century is like. And so we have this uncomfortable mix of retrogressive and progressive attitudes on the part of the characters where they're inconsistent. And Picard, because he's the primary audience identification character, becomes the victim of this, where he is coming off like he's an unenlightened idiot at the beginning of the episode, and then he makes the transition to being the enlightened person who is on board with the new concept by the end of the episode. And we see this in Measure of a Man, for example, where early on he's on maybe Data is a toaster side. And then it's like, after someone in a staff meeting says like one sentence is, "Oh, thank you so much for reminding me that, of course, Data is just another living being. He's just electronic instead of biochemical like us." And it's like instant pivot of viewpoint, at which point he becomes Data's ally and protector. Same exact thing happens in The Offspring, where he's treating Data like he's a toaster that doesn't have a right to reproduce. And then it's like, well, I haven't noticed anybody else consulting you about their procreation. It's like, oh, yeah, okay, how about that? I'm being a retrogressive idiot, aren't I? I should really get with the 24th century program and become absolutely sold on your side of things and now become your protector again.
There's also something else to consider, which is, we assume that the other people on the board are human or humanoid, whose procreation is nobody else's business and doesn't affect anybody. What if you had a species whose procreation could cause a danger to the ship or others?
Replicators.
They would have to, consult with the captain before procreating, wouldn't they?
Well, and issues too of supervisory positions and things like that. I mean, in not just in the military, but in corp. If dating someone who's in your chain of command could be a concern of the boss.
Right. And if you are in a dangerous situation and you're a female crew member who gets pregnant, maybe you do need to let your boss know if you're pregnant or whatever.
Exactly.
You're working next to the warp core. You maybe don't want to be pregnant working next to the warp core. So it's a little iffy that statement there. But anyway, Data says he decided to allow the child to choose its own sex and appearance, which makes sense for an android because it I mean, human beings don't, but
in principle,
toasters do.
In principle, but and I couldn't help with, it's 30 plus years later now, and so wow, there is a lot of gendering going on in this episode. But it's actually stupid the way they play this out. I don't have a problem with him letting Lal pick what race and sex and whatever else Lal is going to be, but he hasn't finished installing the firmware yet. They make it clear that he's doing this in pieces, and they're building it up dramatically. This is a really important choice. You need to look at thousands of options. And so it's like, this is entrusting the decision of what race and sex you're going to be to a 2-year-old.
Right.
Because Lal is still learning things like painting and home and chair and sit. And it's okay, you haven't given her enough basis to decide rationally yet.
They've clearly constructed this episode and the premise so that Lal goes through the stages of maturation like a human child would. Like they want to kind of simulate that with her. But yet you got to have the actor looking like a human being early enough that the audience can connect with her and
they don't have to and they don't have to spend as much money on makeup and all that good stuff too.
Right. So they've painted themselves into a corner with that. Picard at first refuses to call it a child, but Troy asks, "Why does biology rather than technology determine whether it's a child?" Because science. Like that's But we've already crossed that bridge in Measure of a Man, so
I don't know, if one welding robot makes another welding robot, I'm not inclined to think of the second welding robot as a welding robot child.
Right. So Picard doesn't want Data to deactivate it because, as he says, it's a life. But now his concern is how will Starfleet react, because Starfleet is unenlightened and regressive, as we've mentioned. Data then goes over the various approaches for parenting that he's found in different cultures, as Data does. That's become sort of a Data trope.
I love what he says. I've noticed that in most species there is a primal instinct to perpetuate themselves. It's like in every species, Data, that's evolution. If any species did not have a primal instinct to perpetuate itself, it would die.
Yes, those species are now gone early on.
We call them pandas.
So, and he also says he's motivated by the desire to perpetuate himself because he's the last of his kind, except for Laura before Juliana Tainer, Data, who's Data's mom, etc. All of whom are still in the future. Although, have we seen Laura yet by this
Yes,
point?
we've seen Laura.
Okay, so Laura's still out there, but, we'll give him that. Data and Troy then take Lal to the holodeck to choose an appearance, gender, and species, because gender neuter is inadequate, she says. It is a different...
What's this gender neuter chauvinism here?
So Troy has the statement, it's a decision that will affect how people interrelate with you, which is an interesting point. Is it saying that appearances matter, I guess? But we get it narrowed down to female Andorian, human male, human female, Klingon male. So apparently human is the leg up on it. Although I have to point out, when human male appearance shows up, Troy gives the, "Ooh, he's cute. He won't have a problem socializing."
Yeah.
Okay, weird.
This has some of the worst Troy dialogue and acting in the whole episode.
Yeah.
Because Data has shown, while Troy was asleep, Data has shown Lal like thousands of possibilities and has narrowed it down to these 4. The Andorian female is neat as a concept.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look right. It doesn't look like other Andorians we've seen, including other Andorian females that we see later. So it's not very well visually realized. But then we have this Troy line about how if Lal picks the Andorian female, she'll be the only one on the ship. Could cause a problem with socialization. And then they switch to human male. He's cute. He won't have any problem with socialization. Then they switch to human female. I like her. Then they switch to which is signaling where we're going to go. Then they switch to Klingon male, a friend for Worf. And Marina Sirtis, not only are these lame lines, but Marina Sirtis's line delivery on them is terrible.
Yeah. It is. It feels forced.
You wonder sometimes when you have scenes like this, if even the actors are going, okay, I'm going to get through this stupid line. I'm going to say it as ridiculous as I can. So hopefully they cut this scene altogether.
Right. She ends up, anyway, Lal picks human female, and she has more realistic skin and eye color than Data. Apparently he's gotten better at this than his progenitor did.
Well, except that had to always be a deliberate design choice.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do better than that on store mannequins now.
I know. So Data then gives Lal a tour of his quarters as their new home. We have a montage of Lal learning social and other skills. Remember to swallow the drink when you put it in your mouth. Although I have to say her ball playing coordination is better than mine.
That's one of the genuinely funny moments where Data is narrating this montage to us and says that, I forget exactly how he puts it, but like this aspect of her ability to catch a ball is good, but her timing needs work. And they show Wesley throwing a ball to Data and Data catches it. And then Wesley throws the ball to Lal and it just hits Lal and bounces off. And then she raises her hand to catch it. And that's genuinely funny.
Yes. There is a good moment here, a good line where Data learns that teaching a child is a way of learning those things for yourself all over again. And that's true. Any parent will recognize that watching your children learn something you already know is in some ways like experiencing that thing all over again. That's why I love to show my kids like Star Wars, because it's a way of experiencing it for the first time all over again. So that was a kind of a nice moment to put in there. But then Lal asks her purpose, her reason for being. And Data says, our function is to contribute in a positive way to the world in which we live. And like a 2 or 3-year-old, she's then full of questions. Why is the sky black? I like that, actually.
Yeah.
Why is the sky black instead of why is the sky blue?
That was nice. I took that we're here to make a positive contribution. That's basically the Starfleet philosophy.
Yep.
Right. So that's the main philosophy of their civilization. So that was reasonable in context. Other things, though, I didn't, and this is again a problem with Data especially in seasons 1 and 2, where Data he's got Google in his head. He shouldn't have these retrieval problems with what is this concept. But yep. he'll be taking Lal around his quarters like she's a dog or something, and saying painting and showing her, his imitation of the Partridge Family school bus, which is actually based on a famous painting.
Yes.
Or chair, sit, and he's like instructing her like a dog. And then after he says these things, she comes up with the concept that he's talking about, but she's incapable of recognizing it on her own. She has to be told it's a painting, and then, pigments applied to a surface.
Yes.
And then she misrecognizes other things. They sit down on a couch, and they've got a glass table or whatever in front of them, and it's got a flower on it. And she's like, painting. And I said, no, Lal, that is a flower. And it's such stiff artificial writing. I mean, she's got Google in her head.
Well, I wonder if that's the point they're trying to make, and maybe not doing it well, but that disconnection between having this database of billions and billions and billions of facts and actually connecting it to the real world, to like what is actually sitting in front of them. And at least it's better than Data with his, first season query. What is, Now I really wonder if it's just showing that disconnect between receiving the firmware and the operating system and the experience.
Well, yeah, but they also, it is in the real world, it is a problem getting computers to recognize shapes, and identify what objects are. And as a result, computers in the real world will totally bump into stuff.
Yeah.
But she's navigating her environment and can distinguish the painting from the other stuff in her visual field. She should be able to identify it. Our modern problem shouldn't be transferring to them.
Right. They should have solved the problem by then. But, the A lady or the lady in the can that I don't want to activate has access to all of Google, but it still can't integrate, it and recognize things. But that's 21st century, not 24th. So Yeah, I get that point. It is a bit artificial.
Yeah. And by the A lady, we mean first generation Janet technology.
Exactly.
Yes, first generation Janet. So Data decides to, at Wesley's suggestion, he decides to send Lal to school for socialization. So that's a typical bad idea from Wesley. And then Picard talks to the Starfleet Admiral, mean Admiral dude.
Well, Admiral Older Bruce Maddox.
Older Bruce Maddox, yes. Who wants to take away Lal for study for reasons. Again, Picard makes the argument that Data sees the new android as his child, and then he says, well, respectfully, I refuse to the Admiral. I'm like, he's an Admiral. Can you do that? You're a captain. You can't just say it. No, like it's not your choice, really.
We have usual Star Trek loose chain of command insubordination that nobody notices. Later on in the episode, Picard dismisses Data from the Admiral's presence, and it's like, wait, this is the Admiral's meeting. He's the one who gets to dismiss people.
Right. The Admiral, his claim is having Lal being, brought up by Data is bad because Data could undermine it. But Data is the only actually functioning android out there. Why would that be bad?
But he's not the experts.
Yeah,
it is kind of funny to think of this in the parallel of the supposed children's psychologist experts who really put out a lot of bad advice
and want to take the kids away from their parents.
Yeah,
I mean, viewed in that perspective, it actually kind of works, but they don't get it. They don't give us a sustained articulation of the two viewpoints of why this would be good or why this would be bad. All we get is, well, Data's not an expert. And later on, we get there are only two known Sung type androids, and they could both be extinguished if they're both on this ship. So we need to get one of them off the ship for protection of the Sung type android line.
That at least is a decent argument.
Well, I don't think it is, though. If you're concerned about that, why did you let the then before that one known model go on that same starship where he would be destroyed if something happened to the starship? I think that was probably the weakest argument.
In fact, that happens later.
Yep.
Right, exactly. So the Data sends Lal to school, and first she can't relate to the older kids, so they put her with the younger kids, and the younger kids are afraid of her, as they probably rightly so. And Data assumes that the children laughing at Lal was meant unkindly, but I took exception to that because maybe they weren't being unkind. Maybe they're just surprised and amused at her strange responses.
I kind of like this scene. So and I like several things about this. When the teacher is talking to Data about, we tried to place her with the older kids and that didn't work, so we put her with the younger kids. And then we pan back and we see all of these younger kids. They're I don't know, 4 or something, 5, and they're all clustered around a table doing some activity. And Lal is standing over against the wall away from all of them.
Right. And
then we see Data after this talking to Lal in the turbo lift, and she's fascinated by the light of the different decks going by. But then she notes that she asks what's the function of laughter, and Data says it's a human response to humor. And she says, then I, without even knowing about humor, have mastered it. That's genuinely funny. And then I like how Data has this emotional maturity at this point. Because if this was first season Data, even though he'd been in Starfleet for 25 years by that point, he was so naive about human interactions. I could imagine first season Data going, yes, Lal, yes, you have mastered it. But here, even though he's apparently had a big learning curve in the last 2 of his 27 years in Starfleet, now has the emotional maturity to say, the children were laughing at you, Lal, not with you.
Right.
I agree, Dom. Maybe they were laughing with her, or didn't mean it unkindly. But what I like about this is how it shows Data has grown in his emotional awareness.
Right. He does point out that, the thing that we know, that differences sometimes scare people. And Lal has that response that a lot of kids, especially ones who were bullied for being different, say is, well, I don't want to be different. And a lot of us sci-fi nerds, we
feel
can
that one.
Yeah. Well, there's the problem right there. Yep.
Yeah. So Data goes to the only other parent that we have on the show, which is Beverly Crusher, to ask her for parenting advice about Lal's feelings of isolation. And she talks about how Wesley didn't fit in and how she told him about her struggles growing up. And Data at first says, I didn't grow up. And she says, well, but you went through some of this too. And so she helps him realize that he's gone through this, what she's going through, and so he can help her with that. So the scene does end with Data saying, well, I can't give her love. I can't give Lal love. And Beverly says as he leaves, well, I find that hard to believe, given that he's doing the things that look like love to us. So
I also like in this scene, the backstory we get about Wesley, and how his intelligence caused him to have problems making friends as a younger kid. And that makes sense. Also, she's clearly smart too. I mean, she's going to be the head of Starfleet Medical.
Right.
She would have had similar problems too growing up, and she acknowledges she did.
Yes. Yeah.
And the point about love too is, it kind of brings that point of that love is not just that emotional feeling.
Yeah.
There's much more to it. It can be as much an intellectual choice as it is an actual just mushy feeling of caring for someone.
Act of the will. Yeah.
If one welding machine really has it high on its table of priorities to help another welding machine, then that's love.
Well, if the AI decides to help others, it's love. AI love. So we have Picard asleep in bed and gets a call from Admiral Haftel, the bare-chested Picard. By the way, we get a nice what do they call it? Meatball shot? I forget what it's like, the beefcake shot.
Oh, this is where we should have a clip of Alan Rickman from Galaxy Quest saying,
"So you managed to get your shirt off."
Yes. So he's woken up by Haftel, and he was coming himself to look at the android, and will take Lal if he's unsatisfied with what he sees. So we've set up our future conflict. Now we're in 10 forward with Guinan, and this is where Lal's going to learn about socialization. They do marvel at how Lal uses a contraction because, of course, Data uses them all the time.
I know. This is one of the things that I really hate about, I think it was a writing mistake, because they introduced, when we got lore, they introduced the idea that Data never uses contractions. When, of course, the actor slips and uses them all the time because he's a human, not a real robot.
Right.
And they never should have. If they want to give Data a different speech pattern to make him seem different, like not using contractions, great. I'm all for that. But keep it at the script level. That way, no one will notice when you do slip, and B, it will achieve your effect of making him seem different. But any computer can be taught. I mean, I can teach my modern today computer to use contractions. I can just put it in autocorrect. Okay, I am contracts automatically to I'm.
Yep.
Right.
There's no reason that Data can't do that unless Sung deliberately put in something in his programming to stop it. And so what could have been an artistic choice to just make Data seem a little different that would operate on the subliminal level becomes it becomes a writing liability because it doesn't make any sense. And now everybody's going to be on the lookout for when you slip up.
Which I'm pretty sure he does a couple of times during this episode.
Even in this episode, yeah. So he gets Lal a job working at 10 Forward, her first after-school job, so she can observe human behavior. And then in Picard's ready room, they have a meeting about the Admiral coming, and he wonders if the Admiral doesn't think Data has enough parenting experience, how much did the Admiral have when his first child was born? Oh, he's got him there.
Yeah, right.
So I'm going to guess none. So back in 10 Forward, Lal and Guinan are looking at a couple flirting, and they I did like that. This was funny.
This is a good sequence.
Yeah, she sees them start kissing, and Lal says loudly, "He's biting that female."
Yeah.
Oh, even before that, as they're flirting, Lal is noting, they're holding hands and stuff, and she's noticing they're not talking, and she says they seem to be communicating telepathically. And Guinan is like, well, they're both thinking the same thing, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of hinting at stuff in this scene, by the way.
And when they leave, where are they going? Yeah, we'll talk about that. Let Data tell you about that later.
Some things your father will have to explain when he thinks you're ready.
Yes. He's biting that female. That was great.
I know, but that's the best line in the whole show.
Yep. Yes. Then Riker has returned from his wherever he was and comes in, and he doesn't know anything that's going on.
And
with
this is
Data.
the scene that Jonathan Frakes wanted written in so that he could be in this episode and have this scene.
Yes, and he says, looks at her and says, at Lal, it says, "You're new around here," he says to the obviously teenage girl, and flirting with her. And she says, yes, grabs him, pulls him across the bar, and plants one on him. And this is when Data walks in and says, "Commander, what are your intentions toward my daughter?" And Riker's like nonplussed, like, "Your daughter? Nice to meet you."
I
and
gotta
then
go.
runs for the door. Which is, it's kind of funny, but it is ridiculous. That the way it plays out. It's obviously played for laughs.
I think it's better until Data delivers the line, "What are your intentions towards my daughter?" Before, she's just being naive, and it's like, because Guinan has explained that kissing is not biting, it's pressing lips. And so I can imagine a robot that's as naive as Lal immediately wanting to try that out.
Right.
And just Riker's reaction would have been just enough right there.
Yeah.
Just like,
yeah, that's true. Or Data coming and said, "Oh, Commander, I see you've met my daughter." Or whatever.
yeah, that would have been funny too.
That would have been fine. Anyway, Lal and Data then have a discussion about the limitations of their not being able to feel emotions, and
so y'all remember on Battlestar Galactica how we have the different Cylon models and they have different attitudes towards humanity. And the one, I'm blanking on his name. It's number 1, the Brother Cavill model. He played by the guy from Quantum Leap.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
yes.
famous guy. I'm blanking on his name, but
Stanton. Dean Stanton.
Okay. Okay.
So. Yeah.
But he's the most misanthropic of all of the robots. Of all the Cylons. He resents the fact he's been made to look like a human. It's like, I'm a machine. I ought to be seeing the universe in X-rays instead of these globs of goo and stuff like that. And it's interesting to me in this scene, as Lal is talking to Data about how we are not humans, and why do you even want to be a human if you can't be? And it's like, whoa, Lal is in danger of going number 1 and wanting to kill everybody right here.
Right. Before anyone writes in, Dean Stockwell is what
Stockwell, that's
Dean
it,
Stockwell. Yeah. And then she does ask Data, like, why do you try to emulate humans if it just reminds you that you're incomplete? Which is an interesting thing. And he says something interesting here. It's the struggle that is important. And that's an interesting philosophical, approach to things, that it's not so much that whether you succeed or not, it's that you try.
That continuous desire to improve yourself and strive towards the goal, even if you'll never achieve it.
Right. It's a little bit like the Christian viewpoint, when she says, "Be perfect as your Father is perfect," and we have to say, well, we're never going to be that, but it's the trying, it's the looking.
Yeah, I don't see. This is something. This is a problem I kind of have with this philosophy. That's the wrong way to say it. It's not
okay
to my mind.
Okay,
because it is how much you achieve that's important. It is not the struggle that's important. It is how much you're able to achieve. And even if you can't get where you want to be, you can get closer to it than you are now. Okay. And that's what's important. It's important
you keep trying.
Yeah, struggle that's important is kind of like, okay, thank you, Friedrich Nietzsche, but it's not all about struggle. It's about achievement.
That is an important distinction, because the distinctions are good. But that is an important distinction, that it's not just a struggle. It's also that you're getting somewhere.
To quote Dora from Finding Nemo, just keep swimming, just keep swimming.
Man, we're getting all kinds of references this time. So Admiral, not Bruce Maddox, shows up and makes it clear that he's just there to justify his decision, not to form an opinion. He's already decided he's taking Lal and he's filling out the bureaucratic necessity to show up.
What a puritanical prude he is. She's in a bar, and he is so objection to that.
Yes, yeah. He just like how dare you keep here. But then he calls it Picard has a sentimental attitude about androids, accusing him of being sentimental. Like, if it's just an android, then what's the big deal about it working in a bar?
I love Guinan's response. So, I bet you the Admiral's been in the bar too in his time.
Yeah, he doesn't like that. I'm wondering whether he was now. He seems like a wet noodle. So Picard reminds the Admiral that Soong androids are living sentient beings with rights under the law that he helped define, which, i.e., measure of a man. And so Data tells the Admiral that Dalal has been an improvement on himself and that she's best kept near him so that he can serve as the model for a basis of comparison going forward. I'm not sure that's all that convincing, but, I mean, you can have a model that's not here. He's, you know what I mean? So, like you said, they find Lal in 10 forward, and Picard and Data justify that by saying it's so she can observe social interaction and engage in it, which makes sense. I mean, it's not like 10 forward is some dive bar on the waterfront where the sailors go when their ship comes into port.
Right. This is a high-class hotel lobby or high-class hotel bar.
Yeah, exactly. So the Admiral derisively says, "You've made her into a cocktail waitress." And all the cocktail waitresses
technically it's
go.
Kool-Aid that she's serving, not cocktails.
And it is synthale.
Yeah, and it's all synthahol anyway. So yeah.
So the Admiral then ends up interviewing Lal. He tells her that he wants her moved to Starfleet Research because there's only so much you can learn on a starship. You mean the Federation's flagship, whose mission is to seek out new life, new worlds, boldly go where no one has gone before? Yeah, there's only so much you can learn there, where you could learn so much at some starbase.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's a terrible argument.
I do like Lal's response, which is to say, then the logical conclusion is once I've learned everything I can learn here, then I will come to Starfleet Research.
Yeah.
Yes. So then Picard finally gets to realizing that no one has asked Lal what she wants as, under Federation law, a free sentient being. And Lal says, then in that case, I want to stay.
Oh, yeah, and this is where I misspoke earlier. It wasn't Data that Picard dismissed in front of the Admiral. It was Lal. He says, you can go, Lal.
Right.
And it's like, I was just interviewing her, Captain.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen because no one ever notices minor insubordination in Starfleet.
Yes. Lal ends up going to Troy's quarters, and she's obviously upset and tells her that she's feeling scared, which shouldn't be possible because she doesn't have the emotion chip. So that's a malfunction. And
notice it's the Admiral who's unbalanced her.
Yep. Yes. So the argument for taking her to Starfleet Research is undercut by that. The Admiral tells Data that the one irrefutable argument, as we mentioned before, is that there are only two Soong androids with one chip, one lucky shot by a Romulan, and they lose them both, which is interesting given what we have learned in the Picard series, that he mentions Romulans as the potential lucky shot. But the minor spoilers there. The Admiral throws Picard's lack of parenthood in his face, which is dirty pool, I think. He says there comes a time when a parent must give up their child for their own good, which is, talk about ominous. The state taking your child.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's when the parent gives up the child because the child is ready to go, not an admiral from Starfleet shows up and takes the child from you by force, whether the parent thinks that it's good or not.
Right. I mean, given the debates over parental rights these days that we have, it is a bit prescient.
It takes a Starfleet to raise an android. Just saying.
Right.
By the way, going back to the mention of, I just thought this mention of Romulans, I wonder if that was in their thought when they set up Nemesis. Where it was a Romulan, well, Riemann, but.
Yep.
But
yeah. And a clone, but that's a whole nother
argument for a whole nother argument for a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
So Picard mutinies at this point.
Yes. Well, Data says, I do want to cover what Data says here. He says that he created Lal hoping she would enter Starfleet as a way of him giving back for all he's received from Starfleet. But he can't just give her up because it would violate everything he's learned about human parenting. So I do like the idea that Data is seeing Lal as his contribution of giving back. That's a nice sentiment. But yeah, when the Admiral makes a direct order, Picard throws his career out the window and refuses to obey, and makes the argument: there are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders. So okay, there's a, he's got a legal leg to stand on.
He does. Given the ridiculous decisions they made at the JAG hearing,
Right.
But now we're heading towards the center cannot hold. We're heading towards the inevitable conclusion where, because of the nature of this program, Lal cannot be on the Enterprise at the end of this episode. Right. And since Admiral Bad Guy can't be allowed to win either by taking her elsewhere, Lal has to die.
Right. Lal must die. So Troy has called Data to his lab where Lal is malfunctioning, and her emotional response, we find out, is due to a cascade failure of her positronic brain. And the Admiral gamely redeems himself by volunteering to assist Data in trying to fix her.
And this is where the show's writing, even though it's still a little clunky after this is where it really starts to become decent and good. This is where the show starts to redeem itself, is the moment Admiral what's-his-name says, I know it's Halftel, says, "Can I assist?" And Data says yes. So now, okay, great. Gilgamesh and Enkidu have fought, and now they're going to take on the Bull of Heaven together, and it's not going to go well.
Right. So we have the cliche scene, or not cliche, but the expected scene of, waiting outside the operating room, the loved ones, Troy, Geordi, and Wesley.
That's the only thing I didn't like about it. It was such a thinly veiled, surgery scene, where they're waiting for the surgeon to come out, and he's even like washing his hands as he walks out. We couldn't save her. There's nothing we could do, and she's going to die any minute.
Yes, he's washing his hands of the positronic fluid, apparently.
Yeah. So, got to keep those computer viruses off your hands. Always wash, and don't touch your face.
Yeah.
So we have Troy, Geordi, and Wesley, which is a bookend to the beginning of the episode where they were the ones going there. So they're obviously Data's closest friends. That's what we have here. And they're waiting. The Admiral comes out. He tells them there's nothing that could be done, and sounds very emotional, and talks about how impressed he was by Data's superhuman efforts to save Lal, but there's just nothing, no way he could save her.
I did like the touch where the Admiral says by the end his hands were moving so fast I couldn't see them. That's a nice touch.
Right.
And it's better to hear about it than to watch them visualize it, because it would have been hard to pull off a fast motion camera and have it look as dramatic as him just telling us that.
Right. Yeah, he refused to give up. He says, like a father trying to save his child would not give up.
Yeah.
So there's that emotional...
welding machines will just keep going until their programming tells them otherwise.
Right. Well, they are trying to convey the emotional resonance of a parent losing a child. And so we have this scene of them saying goodbye. Lal tells Data she loves him. He says he can't feel it back. And she says, "I'll feel it for us both," which, is touching. And then Data tells Picard that he couldn't allow...
He ate her brain.
Yes, he couldn't allow Lal to disappear, so he transferred her memories and programs to his own brain. Which,
but that doesn't mean he feels what she felt, even though he's remembering it.
Yeah, he remembers her feelings, but doesn't actually feel them.
Apparently.
Yes. And that's where we end with Engage. Of course, set.
And so we have yet another android Katra that never gets paid off.
Right. Over and over again. I will say, and I'm sure you'll agree, that the Picard series does this much better than Offspring does. Which, of course, they have a whole season to do. But,
the Picard series isn't wall-to-wall, unenlightened, preachy writing.
Right.
I mean, it becomes preachy at various points, but it's realized much better than this. This is...
Yeah.
And I like Renee Echevarria as a writer. It's just, this is not, it's his first work and it's not his best work.
Yeah.
It is one of these high concept episodes where we need someone, and it ends up being Picard, who is the unenlightened 20th century viewpoint that then has to get portrayed as, essentially we have a conversion. that happens from one viewpoint to another in this episode. And conversions are notoriously hard to pull off in a realistic fashion in fiction. And so we get this clunky, stiff, preachy writing that as he makes that transition, once again, from being the idiot at the beginning of the show to being Data's advocate and protector by the end of the show. One thing that I found interesting is when Lal first develops emotions, and her first emotion happens to be fear. But when Lal develops emotion, she goes to Troy, and Troy recognizes that Lal is having a genuine emotional experience. But what they don't say in this episode is that she's recognizing it not just based on external appearances because of Lal's behavior change, but because she's a betazoid and can feel what Lal is feeling. They don't settle that. I watched carefully, and they don't settle that either way. No. But in light of the mind meld we get with an android in Picard, it would seem possible for Troy to be feeling the emotions of Lal at this moment in hindsight.
Right.
It is interesting she goes to Troy instead of Data, because maybe she sees Troy as a sister figure or mother figure.
Yeah, mother figure.
Yeah, it is interesting that they made that choice. I'm not sure that I've seen anywhere where they explain why they made that choice, but
and it makes sense for her to do that because she knows Troy's the counselor. She deals with emotions, and Dad doesn't know beans about emotions. So go to the emotion expert lady.
Right. That holds true, and even in human circumstances, sometimes. Interesting. Yeah. So any other notes about this episode that you want to, Father Cory, anything?
One thing I just thinking, as we were talking about Picard, is it's interesting how they made the choice in Picard to have some of the new Soong type androids not have the perfect skin, the human-like skin, even though Data had already solved that.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just kind of this interesting choice. Of course, then eventually they do have it where they develop into the better skin that we see with Daj and
before we finish up, we do have some feedback on our episode 100, on where we talked about the book The Last Best Hope. John Scrivo writes via email, "Happy 100th episode. I was so excited you guys reviewed The Last Best Hope. I finished reading it a couple days after the podcast came out. I really enjoyed how it filled in the backstory highlighted in the Picard series. I wish Zabin and Laris were in the book. I also don't think Agnes Jurati was portrayed in the best light." So we agree on both those points. He says, "The book jacket, yes, I know, a real book, mentions that Una McCormack has written 8 previous Star Trek books. I'm interested to see if they're any good. Also," he points out, "her daughter's name is Verity, so I guess we know where Picard's ship's name came from." She also acknowledges Kirsten Bayer, who played the Admiral in Picard series. She acknowledges her contribution, so she must have really based the character in the book from the character from the series. Then he says, "I'm also wondering if in a future podcast you might recommend some additional Star Trek novels to read. I've only read a few, and I know many are of questionable quality. Maybe other listeners would like to hear some book recommendations too."
You're the expert on that, Dom.
Yeah, I was going to respond as like, I know you guys haven't read as many Star Trek novels, but I've read lots, and there are hundreds literally out there, and I haven't read nearly that many of them. But I think I could try to come up with as part of an future episode, maybe take a brief diversion and come up with a list of some that might be good places to start.
Oh.
The older ones by Diane Duane I thought are particularly good.
Well, it helps too that there's of course the numbered novellas, the little tiny read in about 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then there are more significant novels like this one, like we did, like Last Best Hope, which is it's actually more of a significant novel that we could probably discuss more than these little read them as you're sitting in the airport type novellas that are pretty common for Star Trek.
Because I was impressed by Una McCormack's writing, I just yesterday actually got an audiobook of another one of her Star Trek novels called Enigma Tales, which is set on Cardassia and is about Garak after Deep Space Nine. So I'll be interested
I read that.
to see what that one involves. I have not yet read, and unfortunately, I have it in Kindle, but they did not allow text to speech for this book. and they haven't released it on audiobook, but Andrew Robinson, Garak, the actor who plays Garak, wrote a novel about what happens to Garak after Deep Space Nine called A Stitch in Time. And since it was by the actor who plays the character, I'll treat it as headcanon canonical. So I'm interested in reading that one. It's supposed to go into Garak's backstory and what really happened prior to Deep Space Nine 2, I believe.
I did read Enigma Tales. So that is a good one. That's worth reading. Yeah.
By the way, Una McCormick is British, and her daughter's name is Verity. I wonder if she was named for Verity Lambert, as in the first Doctor Who producer.
Oh, possibly. Yeah.
She is a sci-fi fan, but who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, thank you, John, for the feedback. We do love getting feedback from listeners. We'll try to follow up on that. So as we finish up, we take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including Gary J., Christopher P., Thomas V., Leonidas S., and Megan S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us every week. So that's it from us. What did you think of The Offspring? Do you have a better opinion of it than we did? Let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Deep Space Nine episode Dax. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, congratulations, Data. It's a girl. Toaster.